European History with Dr. Brovkin. Today we continue our discussion of the 30 Years' War, and today's topic is stage 4. No, stage 5. So the first stage is the Czech Revolt, the Bohemian lands. The second stage is the war in France, and in Hessen, the Protestants, Frederick V. And then the third stage is the Danish intervention, the fourth stage is the Swedish intervention, and now we come to the fifth, which is the French intervention. Now, the most important points about the first stages is basically it's a war primarily has a religious component in it, which will change in this last stage. That's why it's so important. So you basically have the Danish intervention supports the Protestants. That's the purpose. The Swedish intervention supports the Protestants. That's the purpose of the intervention. In the second stage, it is absolutely a religious war in France, primarily, but also a little bit in the western part of Germany. It is religious. It's Protestants versus Catholics. And in the first stages of the war, the Catholics are winning. But in the second stages of the war, the Protestants are beginning to win. Both the Danes come close to winning and the Swedes come close to winning. But then it's sort of they're pushed back, and there is a sort of a compromise peace that everybody gets what they originally had in the first place, which is northern Germany was in the hands of the Protestant and the southern ones in the hands of the Catholic. What is new about the fifth stage? The new about the fifth stage is a totally new phenomenon. You have a Catholic country, France, led by a Cardinal, Richelieu, who basically runs the country, and he's de facto governor or prime minister. Louis XIII is not involved. He basically delegated all authority to Cardinal Richelieu. This is the man who destroyed La Rochelle. This is the man who hunted down the Huguenots, the Protestants, from France. He's not the friend of the Protestants. He's not. He's destroying them in France. And at the same time, he first provided help to the Danes and to the Swedes, Protestant countries, against the Holy Roman Empire. And now that they've been defeated or signed peace, he takes up the battle himself. So the fifth stage is 1636, which is right after Sweden is signed peace and is out, the Peace of Prague. And that continues for another 12 years until 1648, and that's the official date of the end of the 30 Years' War. So the French intervention, as I said, is different because it is over territory rather than religious dispute. It is over power and it is over influence in Europe. So it's actually much more of a traditional war between rival powers. It is a traditional war, just like it was at the times of Francois I, between France and the Holy Roman Empire. Now that's back to the same kind of war between France and the Holy Roman Empire, because obviously same reasons as 100 years earlier at the Battle of Pavia. France feels that the Habsburgs surround its territory. The Austrian Belgium is controlled by the Habsburgs, and there are bits and pieces of the Habsburg in Alsace, in Western Germany, and of course in Spain. So geographical position of France makes it very worried about this neighborhood, and wants to, the French kings want to fight against the Spanish and the Habsburgs. However, the war is not going very well for the French. The Spanish and the Germans, the Catholics, which means the Catholics in Germany and the Spanish troops in Belgium, basically cross over into France and devastate northern France. They basically, the war now spreads, the atrocities, the destruction of cities that was in northern Germany. Now it spills over into France itself, and it goes so bad that in 1636, the Spanish and the German troops are approaching Paris. So Paris itself is in danger. They did save Paris, but still the war was on French territory and not going very well. So this is like 6 years later, and it just drags on and on. In 1642, Cardinal Richelieu died, and 1 year after that, Louis XIII dies. And so you had a new situation where you had, again, a regency, which means Queen Mother and the 5-year-old new king, whose name will be Louis XIV. So this is the beginning of the new long, long reign of Louis XIV that would last until 1715. But this is the time when Louise is a child and there's trouble in France. This is again a return of the time of troubles in France. The trouble is that the north of France is occupied by foreigners, and inside France there is what is known in history as Fronde, which is pretty much a conspiracy of big dukes and aristocracy, not of the religious matter anymore, but it's more like what Ivan IV had to face in Russia, which is the boyars, the independent big landowners, what is called in France aristocracy of the sword. They kind of feel the king is weak, the king is a child, this is our time to reassert the power of the landlords vis-a-vis the king. So it's that kind of a conflict. It's not ideological. It is not religious. It's pretty much about power. The king is managed, Louis XIII and Henry IV managed to sort of centralize the government of France, but now they feel this is their chance to assert their independence vis-a-vis the king, and that is what Fronde is all about. The government of Richelieu is replaced by another cardinal. His name is Mazzini, and he's Italian. And that obviously doesn't go very well with the grand landlords, and so they are kind of plotting and scheming, which is very unstable situation. That leads Mazzini to seek peace, and long negotiations ensue, and there are several peace treaties that are collectively known as the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. So we should discuss, this is perhaps the most important peace treaty up until Versailles Peace Treaty of 1918. But before we get to the treaty, let me give you some figures about devastation of the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War is probably the most devastating war in European history. Believe it or not, it may be even proportionately more devastating than World War II. And you will see why. German casualties for all of Germany was 30% population loss. Now in World War II, Germany lost 5 million people. That's not anywhere close. That's not even 10%. 8 million would have been 10%. So that's like huge. Moreover, some parts like Brandenburg, which is where Berlin is, lost 50% of the population. There are some areas of northern Germany that lost 2/3 of the population. That's a total devastation. Württemberg, which is a province in the southwest of Germany next to France, it lost 3/4 of the population. Male population in Germany was reduced by 50%. So this is absolutely catastrophic. I mean, this is unheard of. There's never been a war like that at all in European history. As I mentioned in another presentation, it's like sack of Rome of 1527 spread all over the whole of Germany. That is the kind of devastation. Why did it happen? It happened because of the because of the hired armies, because of the Landknecht, who basically fought not for ideology, not for religion, not even to gain territory. Their sole purpose was to murder, rape, and get rich and rob. So these procedures of coming to a town and burning everything and killing the men and raping the women, it's sort of repeated over and over and over hundreds of times. Moreover, it's not like the Swedes were any better. They came to help the Protestants, but the Swedish troops in northern Germany were equally destructive. And they also used, both the Danes and the Swedes, they used German hired army, Landknecht, as well as their own hired army. And then only by the end of the war they started using the conscript. So essentially, if there was one biggest reason of all why there was such devastation, it's the use of hired armies who had no purpose in war than to pillage, kill, rape, and destroy. And in a sense, that explains why this is the age that finished hired armies. There would be no more Landknecht. There would be no more hired armies. Europe will transition to the national conscript armies that Gustavus Adolphus started with Sweden, and then would be picked up by other nations, and that would be the end of hired armies. So devastation would not be forgotten. As a matter of fact, it gave rise to new mentality about the war, which was partly reflected in Clausewitz, who thought a lot about the 30 Years' War when he later wrote his famous book on war. Swedish army destroyed 2,000 castles, 18,000 villages, and 1,500 towns. So Swedish army was equally devastating as Wallenstein. Now let's move on to the very important political reasons. I will put them in numbers. 7 very important points about the political significance of the Peace of Westphalia. And the numbers are not in their significance. Some of them are more important, others are less important. But I'll start with the first one, which is obvious that I already mentioned, the end of mercenaries and the rise of conscript armies. So this would be, let's say, our number one, that basically you have the rise of national armies. You have the Swedish army, the French army, the English army, the Russian army. It's actually the beginning of decline. Not that the conscripts were the only ones. There's still mercenaries used occasionally, especially in the American Civil War. They would bring in Hessian German troops as for hire. But still, this was dying out. So the rise of national armies is number one. Number two is perhaps the most important, is the transition from ancestral lands to nation states. So let me explain that. Up until the Peace of Westphalia, all these wars, we actually have the principle of ancestral lands, which means people inherit land from their ancestors, from the marriage deals. This is how the Habsburgs got to be kings of Spain. It was a marriage deal. Or this is how the Habsburg get to own Belgium. This was a marriage deal. So you have royal families who intermarry, and then they inherit a certain territory that had no connection to it other than that they own it. They don't know the language, they don't know the culture. This is how the English wound up owning Aquitaine, which was bigger in territory than England itself. And they owned it for about 100 years, and it took 100 years war for the French to win it back. So this is ancestral principle of organization. Now we're transitioning from this to a new principle, and that is the nation state. And this is why, this point number two, this is why the Peace of Westphalia is the most important peace treaty in European history, because it inaugurates the new principle. And as a result, you actually do have national entities, nation states, a state that unites the whole nation. Obviously, the first one comes to mind is France, but also you have Spain that does have foreign possessions, but it is still Spain that has a territory, language, religion that all unites into one. You have England, you have Denmark, you have Sweden, you have Muscovy that becomes Russia, you have Poland that still has some foreign possessions such as a piece of Germany and a piece of Ukraine, but the core of it is still Poland. And that is the most important thing, that you have transition to nation states. Number 3, Sweden becomes a superpower for the next 100 years. Sweden pretty much converts the Baltic Sea into its internal lake. They basically control it on all sides. They own northern shores, the Gulf of Finland, where the future St. Petersburg would be, and it is Swedish at this time. The Baltic countries, it is Swedish. The Polish coast, it is Swedish. All of northern Germany is Swedish. In a sense, that is the northern European superpower that would remain until Peter the Great and the war with Russia in the 18th century. Number 4 is the rise of France. France is in trouble at the end of the war, a peace of Westphalia. But at the same time, the age of Louis XIV is the rise of the glory of France. Culturally, economically, politically, this is the beginning of the golden age of France in terms of its culture, language, and leading up to the French Revolution. France would dominate European politics for the next 200, 300 years. Number 5, decline of Spain. This is the beginning, the actual continuation. The beginning was the Armada, the 1577 war with Britain, with England, that Spain begins its decline. But it continues with the signing of independence of Low Countries and with the weakening of Spain even more during the 30 Years' War. So the golden era of Spain is finishing, and it's becoming less and less significant to a point where you don't even notice it in Europe anymore. Asking yourself, of course, is Spain Europe or is it something else? Because it's sort of out of major stream of development up until the 20th century. Number 6 is perhaps also most important. All of German states basically receive their sovereignty. That means they are independent states. There's quite a lot of them, by some count about 1,000, but they all are signatories, and they all have their territory, their head of government, and they essentially become tiny nation states that essentially Germany splinters finally to its constituent parts. You have Saxony, you have Bavaria, you have Brandenburg, Prussia, you have major ones, and then a whole lot of small ones that are in between. And finally, the last one, which is that the Holy Roman Empire pretty much ceases to exist. With the acknowledgement of independence of the German states, Holy Roman Empire becomes a kind of a fiction, a kind of a decoration. Holy Roman emperors will be still, the title would exist, but it really would be Habsburg Austria that would dominate German states. And that means dominate doesn't mean own. It would be a leader of some, and then eventually Prussia would be a leader of others. And you would have this long division of Germany into those states gravitating to Prussia in the north, Protestant, and to Austria in the south, Catholic, which would only be resolved by Bismarck in the 19th century, when Bismarck's Prussia will unite all of Germany and exclude Austria from it, which would be Klein Deutschland, small Germany, meaning without Austria. So this is perhaps another historically great consequence of the 30 Years' War. New Europe is born. This is the point. A Europe of nation states, a Europe that has gone through the pain of religious wars that will not happen again. That's the point. There's not going to be another religious war. They're done, they're finished. This is going to be the decline of the south of Europe, the decline, slow decline of the south, of the Catholic Spain, Catholic Italy, and slow rise of the north of Europe, led first of all by Netherlands, followed by Britain in terms of trade and commerce, and culturally for the next 2 centuries, Europe will be led by France. Thank you.